There it is.
Oh,
Looking forward. Yeah.
okay.
Good.
Which one?
It's a final. It's one of those two. Which one is final? Yeah, top one. Wouldn't let me delete the other one.
Oh, weird. Oh, perfect. I was scared for a second.
Great, okay.
Okay.
So the only other thing I need to do is be able to do from the beginning.
Okay.
And then to advance the slides, I
just
guess I'll have to click this,
Yeah.
right?
And then I'm not sure how to turn this on. Let me try and turn this microphone on
Okay.
for you.
I did, yeah. I wanted to move this. Testing 1, 2, 3. We're going to wait just a few more minutes for stragglers to arrive, so please bear with us. Yeah, we sort of we engineered it.
Testing.
I was talking to, oh, there. Okay.
Yeah, so. Do you need this recorded? Okay. Yeah, it's fine because we can get it recorded. We were just, the timer was 12 to 1, so that's when we had it recorded. So we're setting it up. I initially thought it was
I know. Everybody's used to that, right? Nowadays we have one.
Hey, they do need a recording. Do you have to send us that? Okay, the schedule already? You're good.
We're good. So it's just a couple more minutes for the last
Yeah.
group.
Okay. Well, good afternoon. Welcome to this event at the Grand Reunion. Welcome to the Grand Reunion. I'm John Pelissero. I'm with the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics at Santa Clara University. And I'll be speaking to you for a little bit this afternoon about really two things. A book that we wrote and published this summer called Voting for Ethics, a guide for U.S. voters, and how ethics is playing out in the 2024 election. I'm going to allow some time for questions after I speak, and encourage you to participate if you've got anything that you'd like to ask. So today I'm going to explore ethical issues that involve politics, in this very specific case, elections, and how ethics is playing out in the campaigns, in the actions and behavior of candidates, how they communicate, and take a look at some changes that have taken place even since 2020 in the general environment of elections in this country. This book was written by myself, Ann Skeet, and the late Hannah Callahan. Hannah actually wrote a first edition of this book, which was released in 2020 as a downloadable print. And it was shortly after Hannah passed away that her book was released. It's a great guide for voters, and one that we believed warranted being updated and expanded for the new election cycle that we're in. And so Ann Skeet and I collaborated to produce the new edition, and the moment just seemed right for a broader discussion of ethics in elections. This quote from former Defense Secretary and CIA Director Leon Panetta really kind of summarizes the importance of ethical behavior in public service and what we need to have a healthy democracy. He was kind enough to actually add an endorsement to the back of the book, along with, and as you may know, Leon Panetta is a Democrat, and it is joined by Tom Campbell, a Republican, former congressman from Silicon Valley. So we were thrilled to have both of them read and endorse the book. Let me tell you a little bit about the book right now. So the book is designed to help individuals become informed voters who can identify candidates who possess the hallmarks of an ethical candidate, conduct ethical campaigns, create an ethical culture in their campaign organization, communicate with voters in a virtuous way, promoting truth, facts, and relevance. Ethical campaigns are, after all, those that serve to create an informed electorate. It follows then that ethical campaign communications are those that are designed to inform voters about matters pertinent to their voting decisions. Responsible communications are those that convey truthful information about the candidate, about their opponent, about the issues in an election race. Ethical messaging also requires that the information being conveyed is fair and it's relevant to the contest. Finally, in order to inform the candidate, candidates must let voters know where they stand on issues and be specific, including the importance of adhering to basic democratic principles like following the rule of law and being committed to ordinary and proper transition of offices between candidates. Ethical campaigns and candidates are also those who raise and spend campaign funds in an ethical fashion, being independent, I should say, from donors, and not promising favors to those who are able to donate to their campaigns. They also are candidates who deploy artificial intelligence, generative AI, in a responsible fashion in their campaigns. And many ethical campaigns actually adopt a campaign code of conduct and have a de facto ethics officer who oversees the day-to-day work of the campaign. I want to step back for a second and talk about what happened in the last election, the 2020 election, because it actually gave rise to one of the reasons that we wanted to update the book on voting for ethics. The 2020 presidential election really opened the eyes of voters to an otherwise unthinkable set of events in U.S. politics. That is, witnessing an incumbent president seeking re-election, claiming that the election had been stolen from him, and refusing to concede the office or welcome the newly elected president. And what we saw from November 6th, 2020 through January 20th, 2021, when President Biden was sworn into office, is we saw many candidates, elected public officials, and national political leaders refusing to abide by the rules that define how elections are to be conducted, certified, and supported by winners and losers. Many tried to prevent the transition of power to the newly elected president, which threatened centuries-long duty of loyalty to the rule of law. And as most of you, I'm sure, know, to this day, many public officials still maintain that President Biden was not legitimately elected and have continued to spread election denialism in our political environment. And in nearly every state legislature since 2020, there's been an effort to try to adopt restrictions on voting and measures to interfere with the conduct of elections, all done in the name of election integrity and claims of a stolen 2020 election. So why does the rule of law matter so much? Why do peaceful transitions of power or transitions of office matter so much in a democracy? Well, we make an argument in the book for the importance of voters choosing candidates who will accept the rule of law in elections, something that actually seemed unnecessary to even talk about prior to 2020. Honor the tradition of peaceful, orderly transitions of public offices to the winners of elections. You can always try again if you lost, and you have to graciously accept defeat. Support public laws and policies that encourage voting. Demonstrate fairness and protect voting rights in the access to the vote, and respect the role of state and local election authorities who legally oversee the administration and integrity of our elections. No democracy can survive if public officials are willing to ignore the rule of law. Candidates who choose to run for public office should demonstrate in their words, in their actions, that they have and will support the rule of law as elected public officials. To elect individuals to public office who promote actions to subvert the federal or state constitutions, laws, is to place democracy in jeopardy. I'll say more on this a little bit later. So, what does it mean to be a citizen who votes for ethics? An informed and engaged electorate is really important to a healthy democracy. And we believe, and I'm saying myself and my co-authors, that an informed electorate will be, an informed set of voters will be ethical voters. It's important not to confuse education with information. Higher educated individuals may be ethical voters, but one's level of education is not necessarily a determinant of ethical choices. It really depends on how informed one is about the offices up for election, who the candidates are, and how the candidates are conducting their campaigns. One can be well informed and prepared to vote, regardless of one's level of education. Knowing what an ethical candidate and ethical campaign should look like will empower voters to make choices at the ballot box that are ethically focused. We even offer a way for voters to evaluate candidates on a report card, and we share that in the book. In the book, we also recommend that voters develop information literacy as a means to avoid AI-enhanced manipulation attempts in the election. But to be honest with you, this may prove to be very challenging. As Axios reported in an article just this week, and I'm quoting, "Humans are not great at detecting AI-generated text, images, and video right now. And as AI models improve, detection will only get harder. So we have some work ahead of us if we're going to really understand the validity of AI-generated materials that are used in political campaigns. So let's talk a little bit about election 2024 and focus on the presidential election primarily. So our candidates for president are former President Donald Trump for the Republicans and Vice President Kamala Harris for the Democrats. At this point, a few weeks before the November 5th election, most voters have made up their minds before the November election day. And in fact, most voters will be able to vote in the presidential election before November 5th. At this point, only about 6 to 8% of voters are truly undecided. They're not undecided about voting. Most have decided whether they're going to vote or not. The ones who will make a difference in an election are that percentage that intend to vote but still haven't decided which candidate they're going to support. As of this week, about 4 million voters have already cast their ballots in early voting or by mail. So that's about 2% of those that are likely to vote have already had an opportunity. 40 of the states are already open for either early voting or mail-in ballots. And in a number that actually correlates pretty closely to 2020, 52 million individuals have already requested a mail-in ballot for this election. So that's significant. Are eligible voters going to participate? Well, in 2020, we saw a record turnout. 66% of eligible voters turned out to vote in the 2020 presidential election. If you go back even just to 1996, we had about 50% of eligible voters who participated in presidential elections in this country. And that's pretty much the way it's been. It's never been much higher than 50% for about 100 years. If you look at state elections, midterm elections, local elections, the participation rates, of course, are much, much lower than that. Many would think that we are on track now to have a voter turnout rate that will be similar to what we saw in 2020. When the candidates appeared to be a rematch between former President Trump and President Joe Biden, many predicted we were going to have low voter turnout. Voters were generally not excited about a rematch between these two gentlemen. But the Democratic Party nomination of Harris after Joe Biden dropped out of the race changed the dynamics, and it now appears that we may see an even higher turnout of voting this year. If we do experience higher voter turnout, there will be a healthy sign about the strength of our democracy and the seriousness with which voters take their ethical responsibilities or duties to participate in our elections. Voting for ethics really begins with voting, and we want to do everything we can to encourage and to make it possible for people to exercise this right in the fairest way that we can. You know, it's never been easier to vote with the adoption of laws in many states that allow for same-day registration and voting, mail-in ballots, early balloting, early voting, and casting provisional ballots when there's any question about the voter's eligibility at the polling site. We're hoping that we're going to see a good voter turnout similar to 2020 or higher, and that'll begin to shape up more in the coming days. I talked in the beginning about the importance of being an informed voter, and there are different opportunities along the way in a presidential campaign for us to obtain more information. One is, of course, to look at the websites of the two candidates, such as I have displayed here. Others to take a look at the platforms that were adopted by the Democratic and Republican Party delegates at their national conventions. But we have another device that we talk a lot about and we sort of look forward to in our political system, and that's having debates. In our book, we make the case for ethical debates. They're a sign of a healthy democracy. They're one way to inform voters of the differences between candidates and how they comport themselves in an unscripted event. How should we conduct debates that are ethical? There are really three things that we should expect of candidates in an ethical debate. Candidates should show respect for the voters who are watching and listening and going to be reading about what the candidates say. We expect candidates to demonstrate respect for their opponents during the debate. And we expect candidates to respect the debate process itself. Debates do matter, as we witnessed in this year's general election debates. Let me back up just a little bit and talk about the primary season. If you think about it, very little mattered in the GOP primary debates, and there were a lot of them. I even attended one in Milwaukee, because Trump refused to participate in the debates. And the field of Republican challengers to former President Trump narrowed and narrowed until Nikki Haley was the last person standing. And without any debates with Donald Trump and without any real success in primary elections, there was no debate with Trump during the primary season. There also were no debates with Joe Biden. No Democratic challengers came forward deferring to the president's intent to run for re-election. And there were a couple of people who tried to get some attention and ask for time for debates, but President Biden didn't feel it necessary to participate in those because he had the overwhelming support of the Democratic Party. But we did have debates. We all, I think, recall the first debate in which President Biden and former President Trump debated one another. In that first debate, it's very clear that President Biden had a stunning poor performance, which resulted ultimately in his leaving the race about a month later. Although many Democratic leaders urged Biden to drop out because of his age and his ability were now in question, he resisted those efforts for several weeks. He ultimately, though, chose the path of an ethical leader. He placed his country, he placed his political party over his own personal ambitions. During that debate with President Biden, former President Trump had a better than expected presentation in the debate with Biden. Although he offered many falsehoods during the debate, and he did not demonstrate respect for his opponent. He wouldn't shake the president's hand, he wouldn't look at Biden during the debate, and he frequently misrepresented his opponent's positions. There was, as you may know, no fact-checking in that debate. There also was no audience, and not having an audience is actually a reasonable step to take so that the candidates are speaking to the American people and not just to the audience that's in the room. And in the past 2020 debates, 2016 debates, the audience actually was a bit of a distraction for many. There was a second debate, as you know, between Vice President Harris and former President Trump. Harris had her first unscripted opportunity to introduce herself to the country as a candidate for president, and she delivered a debate performance that was respectful to the voters and the debate process, even if she was a bit short on policy specifics in responding to questions. In contrast, former President Trump debated with a deficit of respect for voters, his opponent, and the process. Honestly, any objective observer would say that his lies were many, and his remarks about, for example, Haitian immigrants in Ohio was intended to sow division and contempt toward migrants. He apparently, based upon polls, did not gain any public support from this debate, although it strongly appealed primarily to his own political base. There was fact-checking during that debate. Most of the facts checked were called out by the moderators in regard to things that former President Trump had said, and I don't believe there was an actual fact-checking of called out for Vice President Harris. Then we had the vice presidential debate, and we have the picture here, between Senator J.D. Vance and Governor Tim Walz. This was a debate that was the closest to the ethical debate standard that we have articulated. Vance and Walz were respectful to one another. They were issue-focused. and it was likely, however, not a significant factor in voters' choices. Few vice presidential debates make a difference, although they typically will have a moment or two that will go viral, that will be remembered more than others. But this was probably the best of the debates in terms of substance and decorum. We're looking for candidates who possess and demonstrate in their character ethical virtues. In our book, we identify characteristics of ethical leadership in candidates. These are candidates who, as leaders, will do the right thing. They'll be role models who encourage ethical conduct. They have ethical elements and virtues in their character. They're a community builder more than a divider. They can demonstrate the value of placing the public's interest before any personal interests. They accept responsibility when things go wrong or when untrue things are put forward. And they contribute to improving our political system. Virtue is important in 2024. It's an important ethical value, and we certainly must look for this as we evaluate candidates who are running for any office here. Unfortunately, we have a history of candidates' ethical failures in terms of honesty, transparency, integrity, not just among presidential candidates, but even in other races. Their communications have to be fair, they have to be relevant, and they have to be factual. And their campaign promises should be achievable and consistent across audiences and stakeholders, not just saying one thing to one audience and something completely different to another. So, how do we assess the ethical virtues thus far among our presidential candidates? Well, an informed voter could reasonably discern that former President Trump continues a pattern of lying and misinforming and talking about irrelevant matters in this campaign. His running mate, Senator Vance, has been making up stories that he said he's made up to get media attention. Vice President Harris has some issues of limited transparency, leaving the voters looking for more about exactly what her policies are going to be. And Governor Walz's misleading statements and explanations of inconsistencies in his stories is a nagging problem for the governor and could have an impact on the race. So besides the candidates who are running in this 2024 presidential election cycle, there are three important developments that I want to touch on that have ethical implications for this election and for voters. The first is that, an ethical candidate or public official would always promote easy access to the ballot and encourage the widest voter turnout possible. Laws and procedures that expand voting rights would include such things as same-day voter registration and voting, absentee or mail-in voting for all without having to offer an excuse, early voting times and convenient early voting locations, provisional voting for those whose credentials are challenged, all mail voting, and convenient overseas and military voting options. Also, even making it easy for college students to vote on or near their campuses. Expanding and promoting the right to vote is the ethical path to elections in a democracy. And in 2023 alone, bills were adopted into law in 23 states that expanded or promoted easier voting. However, some states are making it more difficult for voters to exercise their ethical rights as citizens. If one looks at the totality of state legislative restrictions on voting since the 2020 election, nearly 1,200 bills have been introduced in state legislatures, and about 60 of those have become law between 2021 and 2023. Although the number of laws enacted to restrict voting rights or the process of voting was a small proportion of all the bills that were introduced, the organized efforts of state legislators to enact restrictions on people's rights when it came to voting was really unprecedented and unfortunate effort to curtail voting rights. The new restrictive laws that have been adopted included such things as making it more difficult to register to vote, with more stringent requirements to prove you're eligible to register. We saw just recently in the U.S. House of Representatives, during an effort to provide continued funding to the federal government, the House Republicans introduced the SAFE Act, and that act was to ensure that non-citizens were not being allowed to register to vote. Well, they're not, and it's actually not a problem in this country. You talk to secretaries of state and local election authorities like county clerks, that's not a problem. But nonetheless, there was an attempt to tag that onto a bill to fund the federal government, which is in all of our interests, and fortunately it was stripped out of there before the funding resolution was passed. So we also have new restrictive laws in the states restricting when voting can take place, often limiting early voting, mail-in voting, or the times of day for casting ballots. In other words, shortening the amount of time and making it less convenient to participate. Limiting where polling places can be established, often reducing the number of polling locations. Closing polling locations on college campuses, that's happened in Texas as an example, or forcing many voters to travel farther and wait longer to cast a ballot. And they've been limiting drop-off boxes for mail or absentee ballots in many states. I come from Illinois, and I've followed Chicago politics for a long time, but I'll give you one thing that happened in a suburban county of Chicago just a few weeks ago. The county clerk put a drop-off box, similar to a mailbox, outside of the county building for voters to be able to drop off their mail-in ballots, because some voters are understandably concerned that it could get lost in the mail, so they want to hand deliver it. Another county official, the county executive, went out and physically removed the drop-in box, the drop-off box, and moved it to the basement in a locked room of the county building. When asked why he did this, and basically was interfering with the election, he said, well, I don't believe the box is secure. We don't know who's putting stuff in there. We don't know how many ballots are being stuffed. And so I just want to make sure that what's in there is taken care of. So I've secured it in the basement until we decide, whether we've got the right system or not. And the county clerk is now in the position of having to sue the county executive, the county board chair, for the actions they took. Now, if you or I went and did that, we would be charged with a crime for stealing a ballot box. Anyway, it goes on in many places. So we see these restrictions taking place where it's becoming more difficult for voters to exercise their ethical rights as citizens. From 2021 to 2023, there were nearly 250 bills introduced at the states to interfere with the normal duties of local election authorities. There are examples of unethical laws or procedures that interfere with or subvert the election processes that have been growing in several states. And these have been documented very well by groups like the Brennan Center for Justice and a group called Democracy Docket, which is tracking court cases involving voting and elections in the country. Examples of unethical laws or procedures that have been adopted is allowing state legislators to control election results, to literally take the responsibility away from the Secretary of State and other local election authorities, invalidating the actions by duly appointed election authorities, permitting poll watchers to interfere with a voter casting their ballot rather than simply observing and noting that they felt there was a question about a voter's participation. Restricting assistance to voters, directions to polls, entry points of buildings where you would vote, poor waiting areas, no assistance to those waiting in lines. Things like umbrellas or water are not allowed to be given to voters who may be standing out in the weather. Partisan interference in election tabulation and certification. And most concerning, intimidation of election volunteers and officials. And oftentimes, this is being done, again, in the name of election integrity. And most recently, you probably just saw this, prohibiting the use of machine tally of votes. This is something we have been doing for decades. Even before there were computers, we were using machinery to tally votes in those old voting booths that you would go into and pull a lever. As you may know, Georgia's Board of Elections, State Board of Elections, just required that all votes in Georgia must be counted by hand. That will do two things. It will significantly slow down the counting of ballots during the election, and it will inject far more instances of human error into the tallying of this. It is opposed by the Republican Secretary of State, Republican county clerks, and most of these measures that I've just talked about are opposed by the secretaries of state and the local election authorities of both political parties in these states. It's sort of chasing after a problem that does not exist. There's a third change since 2020, and it's about AI, artificial intelligence, in campaigns. Generative AI's influence on campaign communications is evolving, and not always in positive ways. I think what we're going to see is that the 2024 elections are going to really help us figure out what the norms should be for the use of AI in campaigns, in campaign advertising, other kinds of campaign communications, and so forth. Sorry. Not sure what happened here. So there are some questions we should ask about using AI in an ethical campaign. What are the candidates' policies on AI? What are their policies about using fake news or deep fakes in impersonating an individual's voice or image in campaign advertising? How does the use of AI by a candidate protect or advance the voter's interest? Does it provide better information if it is properly labeled as an AI-generated piece of communication? AI-enhanced manipulation attempts in the election can be discovered by identifying who's funded the distribution of information that's in question, looking for obvious signs of AI use, which are becoming more subtle as AI's use becomes more pervasive, knowing the source of information being consumed, knowing how information is gathered, vetted, edited, and how it is being shared. Regulation of AI is being done by states, including California. This particular ad here, this is a video. It was produced by the Republican National Committee when President Biden was still running. And it presents it's all AI-generated video with sort of a dystopian view of what will happen to this country in a second Biden administration. It's just one of many examples. The regulation of AI is largely being done today by the states, including California, which has put some requirements for identifying who's running an ad, the fact that the communication is generated by AI, and so forth. And there are other states, Michigan, Florida, there's about 15 states that are actively regulating or attempting to regulate AI in this election. The Federal Communications Commission has acted to try to guarantee honesty and transparency in these ads. Back during the New Hampshire primary, an AI-generated fake robocall of President Biden's voice told voters not to participate in the New Hampshire primary because if they voted in the primary, they would be ineligible from voting in the general election. The Federal Communications Commission stepped in after the fact, made the ad come down, fined the creator of the ad, I think it was $6 million, and a $2 million fine on the campaign that was using it. The Federal Elections Commission is also involved in regulating this, but after months and months of talking about it, they decided in August that they are not going to try to regulate AI during this campaign. They believe that they would be overstepping their authority. They want to wait for Congress to act on AI regulation, and that will guide what the Federal Elections Commission can do. Finally, ethical campaigns really are designed to drive civic engagement. And we believe that citizens have an ethical duty to vote, as Ann Skeet and I have described in a recent article that was published in SCU's magazine. We want greater civic engagement as ethical citizens. And we believe that one of the reasons for the current civic disengagement in our political processes, beyond elections, the more broad decline in civic engagement, turns a blind eye toward unethical campaign practices, and but that's probably, campaigns and elections sometimes are what actually turn voters off from wanting to be active participants. So we believe that encouraging ethical campaigns will have three important benefits. It'll help decrease political polarity by reducing the rancor in political races. It will help restore public trust in government by ensuring fairness and integrity in campaigns. It will help increase civic engagement, creating a process that not only encourages an informed and involved electorate, but also encourages good people to run for office. The job, after all, that they seek is a position of trust. We, as their future constituents, should be able to trust our candidates to be, when they are in office, good stewards of public funds, trust them to communicate with fairness, truth, and relevance, trust them to uphold the rule of law, and trust them to always act in the public's best interest and not in their own. So those are some of my thoughts about voting for ethics in the 2024 election. And in the interest of political engagement, this picture shows our three grandchildren putting get out the vote stickers on postcards that my wife was helping to prepare for voters. Yes, sir.
You had mentioned that so many elected officials in Georgia were against the hand counting of ballots. How did that get passed into law then? And how is that playing out in other states?
Yeah, it was a strong effort on the part of Republicans in the state of Georgia to find ways to prevent what happened in 2020, that is where the Democratic candidate won election. The Republicans gained a majority of the appointed seats on the Georgia State Board of Election, and they pushed through a rule that they sent out to the Secretary of State and all of the local election authorities. These are your county clerks and city clerks and registrars that require them not to use machines. You know, we've seen county by county efforts like this succeed in some states. Even in Northern California, several county election boards were convinced to stop using the Dominion voting systems that were the subject of many unwarranted lawsuits. And there aren't many other good options for replacing them. And so some have placed themselves in a position, as they have in other states, where they're going to have to no, not that. The authority granted to their election board could only be appealed to a court. Yeah. A question, right here, and then we'll come, sir, to you in the back.
You mentioned 52 million requests for mail-in ballots. Does that include states like California that's a fully mail-in at your option, or like Oregon that doesn't even have any precincts any longer? Or does that exclude? What does that 52 million
Yeah, the 52 million comes from all states, including those that haven't as yet formally started. There's I think it's 9 or 10 states that haven't formally started early voting of any sort, but they still allow for absentee balloting or mail-in balloting. So it does include those. I look at the California numbers. It's less than 1% that have cast an early vote, or a mail-in vote, I should say, at this point. There is a story in yesterday or today's New York Times that tracks all of the states and what's happening in terms of early voting, mail-in voting, and a couple of other things. So it's worth looking at. They got some useful graphs. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Is it on? Okay. Thank you for your discussion. I found it very one-sided, but that's okay. Can you define a qualified voter for a federal election?
Could I describe a qualified voter?
Yes. Who can vote in our federal elections? What are the qualifications required?
Yeah, the qualifications are those.
They must be alive. They must be over 18.
Yeah,
those
18 or over.
Yeah. Can you define those?
Yeah. Those the federal constitutional protections for voting are just those, that define who's eligible to vote at what age. But most of the other rules involving voter eligibility are established at the state level. But the federal courts have provided fairly wide protection for anyone who's 18 years of age or older, a citizen of the United States, could be a naturalized citizen, to be able to participate in our elections. Our federal elections are not run by the federal government. They're run by the states and the territories. And so what the federal government largely has done is to establish some broad rights for voting in the Constitution, in laws like the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and its subsequent renewals. And the rest of the requirements are established at the states. For example, can a felon vote? Can a felon, after they've completed their sentence, vote? Those are all determined at the state level. I'm not sure I caught the last part of your question. Yeah, take the mic again, please.
Let's just say that you have to be a citizen of the United States.
Yes.
Can Nebraska say that you don't have to be a citizen of the United States to vote in a federal election?
No, that's specified. That's a constitutional protection.
So that's covered by the federal government?
Yes. Right here. We'll get to.
Thank you for the talk. I was curious as to your thoughts about the Electoral College and whether you think it represents, if not a barrier to ethical voting, at least a pitfall to it, and sort of what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, good question. I'm a career political scientist. I've been teaching and researching political science, American politics for now over 40 years, and it's my belief that the Electoral College no longer serves the purpose that the founders thought we needed to have. It was another one of those ways in which the founding fathers, and they were fathers, but where the founders created a system that really wasn't designed to encourage people to have their views represented in government. That's why we limited the direct election of a president, because they were rather distrustful of ordinary citizens to be able to do this. The problem with the Electoral College, and it plays out at election time, campaign time during elections, is that we see all of the attention focused on a handful of states. The issues that are important in smaller states, states that are not among the battleground ones for the Electoral College, tend to be ignored. And the focus of candidates running for president is on those states and those states' voters that are actually going to determine who's going to get 270 electoral votes. It still, in a sense, favors the small states because of the way redistricting is done in this country, and the fact that we guarantee in our Constitution that regardless of the population size of your state, every state will have 2 senators, regardless of population. Every state will have no less than 1 representative in the House of Representatives. And that gives enormous political power to small states, even though their numbers are inherently small relative to California or New York, Texas or Florida in the electoral college numbers. Should we trust voters directly to choose their president? I think we should. And we went through too many elections in recent cycles in which one candidate won the popular vote and another candidate won the electoral college vote. And that really speaks to the fact that we don't have the most democratic way of choosing our presidents. We'll go here and then we've got two.
Some thoughts from you on it. It seems difficult to go and progress to an ethical voting situation when we have as much as we've got going now with PACs, other participants and other players in putting forth what you've drawn attention to. How do we get there?
How do we get there?
How do we get to, ethical, more ethical voting when the system basically is going away from
well,
that?
We don't stop trying. We don't stop trying to get legislation passed in the states and in Congress that expands the ability to vote, that makes it easy for people to participate, that we could have adopted a system of public financing for presidential campaigns. Oh, by the way, we had that, didn't we? We still have it. Just presidential candidates aren't accepting that money because they can raise so much more otherwise. But we could have made a requirement for obtaining public support for campaigns that you have to demonstrate that you're going to conduct an ethical, respectful campaign with integrity. And the uphill battle that I was describing is not just in state legislatures and in Congress, where we have this significant partisanship that prevents any bipartisan good government, common good kinds of solutions. But we also find it's an uphill battle in many courts now to have the courts recognize some of the ethical means by which election and voter participation can be expanded. And when the Supreme Court allowed dark money and these political action committees to be recognized in effect as persons that have a constitutional right to participate in our system, we created a system which money dictates so much of who gets a nomination, who gets elected, who gets their message out and who doesn't. And oftentimes, as you know, we don't know who's backing this, where this money is coming from. And as much as many of the rules are designed to prevent those political action committees from coordinating their work with individual campaigns, we know it goes on. And the courts are not willing. They basically defer and say, well, this is really a political matter. Yes, sir.
Thank you. So I was intrigued by the title to this discussion is Voting for Ethics, which brings me to an ongoing confusion that I sometimes have, what's ethical versus what's moral versus what's legal versus what's virtuous. I was wondering if it would be better to call the discussion voting for virtues or voting for honesty, because I think people, the general public, understand that concept maybe more clearly than ethics.
Good point. Thank you. The framework for ethical decision making that we rely upon actually says there is more than one lens to apply to determining what's ethical. Virtue is one of them. We should look for people whose character reflects the virtues of honesty and truthfulness and integrity. We also should be looking for a fairness, justice in the way our elections are conducted and voting is implemented. We should be looking to protect voting rights. Rights is a very important ethical standard to uphold. There's also the common good. What is in the best interests of society as a whole, of our country as a whole? It's not that we try to be overtly partisan or to pass measures that will favor one political party or one partisan interest over another. But what's best? What's in the public interest? How can the common good be served? And voting for ethics involves, any number of these lenses, and as well as, the duty to care about others, to care about the future of this country, to care about the rule of law. So there are a variety of lenses or approaches that we can take to ethical decision making and evaluating candidates as ethical voters. Do we have another question? Yes. I think we got time for maybe one more after this.
Yeah, so with your vast experience, I'm wondering what your take is on what I call the intrusion and prevention of Latinos and Black communities, because a lot of what's happening in states like Florida and Texas really harks back to the 1950s, 1960s, really prevention of those communities. And so, Latinos are, they're known as, swinging elections, but then with AI, we've also seen a lot of intrusion into that, a lot of fear mongering. So what is your take, in this election regarding basically the values and human dignity of those communities to be able to exercise those rights? Like in Texas, a lot of those voting spaces have been removed.
Yes. My view is that any attempts to use race or ethnicity or class to limit who can participate, how they can participate in our political system is wrong, and it's unethical. We should do everything we can to level the playing field and ensure that regardless of one's background, everyone has the same opportunities to participate, and we should actually be encouraging efforts to get out the vote from among our citizens of different races and ethnicities. And anything that's done to suppress voting by these groups is clearly unethical. And there have been some instances of that have come up in this election cycle. I think the most overt of those efforts have been efforts in some states to limit the polling places in neighborhoods, and even in broader jurisdictions that have large populations of persons of color. And that's not only unfortunate, but it should be illegal. And there's just been too much backtracking within the courts on the protections that were otherwise there, especially under the, the renewals of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, to ensure that there would be extra efforts taken actually to provide access to the ballot box in those communities. Thank you. Okay, last question, I think.
What I'm most appalled about is that some people say, I don't care. I know the truth. Don't confuse me with the facts. And I'm sure many of you have heard that, that they, I don't care that this candidate is ethical. I don't care if they lie. I don't, the whole, but they have my back. How do you address that?
Well, it comes down to character and reminding those that you talk about that character is a very important aspect of choosing a person who's going to lead this country. And the fact is that the more lies and misrepresentations are repeated, the more people become either immune to that, or they come to believe it. And part of repeating the lies during political campaigns is to make people not only believe, but to actually question whether their thinking has been wrong all along about some of these issues. Yeah, I'm Jesuit educated. I've spent my career in Jesuit universities from Wisconsin to Illinois to here at Santa Clara. And one of the things that Jesuit universities do a good job about is training and developing students to be critical thinkers, to really discern before making decisions, and to apply the ethical awareness that they develop in their studies to being good citizens, good members of their community, good voters. And I oftentimes fall back to that, thinking that the values that are promoted in a place like here are really important and maybe needed more than ever today. Thank you all for coming today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
The guy said is, hey, look, we're going the other way. The PACs, the dirty money, it's irreversible. I'm really concerned about that. Aren't you?
Yeah, oh, I
You
am.
say we're trying, but it's almost like we're trying to swim against the tide.
Well, I think a major battle was lost when the Supreme Court, recognized Citizens United in that case, and basically gave these big money organizations the same status as you and I have as an individual citizen and voter.
One last thing, I'd ask this to so many political science and history professors here. No one has an answer. How is it Puerto Rico, which is a commonwealth, can vote in the primaries, but not in the election because they have no electoral laws?
The only territory that has electoral votes is D.C. Yeah.
But they vote in the primaries.
Yeah, they can because remember, those are really political party events. Yeah. Right. Okay. Thanks for coming. Hi. Thank you. It's if you're going to talk about facts and what's actually happening, it's hard not to sound like you're more critical of one side than the other, but it's still factual. Thank you. Hi. Hi, Jim.
Given your comment about the importance of the common good in fair elections, what do you think is the best strategy to get rid of the Electoral College? The approach.
Well,
I mean, I know it takes to actually do it legally, but
yeah, I don't think Congress will ever do it formally. Congress may not, even be willing to place the question before the states. So you could have the states vote through constitutional conventions. Yeah, and put that forth. But it probably still would take decades to change it.
all right. Well,
All right.
all right.
Thanks for coming, Jim.
Yeah, thank you.
Is your book available in the bookstore?
I think it is. I don't know that for a fact. The bookstore was asked to order copies. Otherwise, it's available at barnesandnoble.com, Amazon.
Okay.
Yeah. Voting for Ethics, yeah. All right. Hi.
Anything that I learned here, I always told people that Santa Clara taught me how to think.
Oh,
As soon as you made your comments, I said, I got to go outside.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to hear that.
Learn all different things, but
Thank you for coming today. Kate.
I've had this ongoing concern with ethics because you kind of thought about that it can be somewhat, it can be nebulous and kind of open-ended, you know what I mean, and multifaceted to the point that it's hard for the especially high school graduate. I mean, ethics is kind of like hocus pocus. They don't know what it could mean.
Yeah. And we try at the Markkula Center to inform people that ethics is not, for example, about the law. Laws can be legal, but they can also be unethical. It's not the same as religion,
Morals.
or morals more broadly. And so that's why we look at it from different kinds of lenses, as I said. And I get your point about is it really just about virtue? Is that how you?
Or is it just about what we want to talk about now? You know what I mean? Then use the word as a kind. But the other thing, on the more practical. The gentleman there, you talked about the Electoral College, and there's one reason which you coming from the Illinois area. There's one thing that the Electoral College has an event is it compartmentalizes the effective fraud. So like if May Daily stuffs the boxes, it only affects those electoral.
Only in that
Whereas
state.
if it's one big compartment, the whole thing gets flooded.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that depends on how much.
Although its impact would be much less if you factored in those kind
if
of.
the rest of the country is honest.
Yeah.
and there's a whole load. But see, that depends on what your assessment of it is. How much ballot? I'm not talking about voter fraud, like who votes or not, but how much ballot fraud goes on. Like the old James Curley vote alien.
Right.
If you have a disposition to think that that does go on in the urban areas or in the deep countryside with the sheriffs in Texas and all that, if you think there's a lot of it, then the need for compartmentalization has more value.
Thanks for coming today.
Well, thank you.
All right. Hi.
Hi there. I want to say thank you for doing this. I thought it was so good.
Oh, thank you.
And I thought it was very one-sided too, in favor of ethics.
That's
I'm against that.
If you're just looking at the facts, that's what we're trying to present something.
I mean, I'm sorry, but the whole first part of your talk, I was just thinking, my husband like flabbergasted, like crazy. This is just supposed to be about ethics, and yet you can't get away from the fact that we've been.
Yeah, well,
there's one candidate in the race who illustrates almost the counterpoint to every single thing you said in high relief. And I know that's not your purpose here today, but it's impossible to. You don't do this work in a vacuum.
No, as I said, I taught for 40 years, and I always tried to be as objective as possible in teaching, not come across in any partisan way. But it was really difficult my last few years of teaching, which was during the Trump administration, not to have to kind of guide students to say, this we can talk about what happened, but you also have to understand this is wrong on many levels. Yeah.
No, so I have just one quick question for you, because I loved how also you touched on how there's so many counter-majoritarian forces. I think one Republican has won the popular vote in the last 40 years, and that was George W. Bush after 9/11.
Yes.
So, I mean, do the math, literally. This is crazy. But what in your, do you have anything to say on what are the best, we're from Washington, we have 100% mail-in voting, which means really good access to voting, like we get an A for that.